Psalm 14:1 starts out, "The fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt, their deeds are vile. There is no one who does good." Now, in order to understand what David means by the fool, we need to keep in mind the themes that have developed from Psalms 1 through 13. In Psalm 1, David distinguishes between the righteous and the wicked. The righteous are those who follow God's instruction, who meditate on his word day and night. The wicked do not. In Psalm 2, we see God declaring that he has installed his king on Zion, his holy mountain. Those who surrender to the king are God's people. Those who reject his rule stand against him. And in Psalms 3 through 13, this conflict between the righteous and the wicked is developed over and over again. The wicked are referred to, of course, that particular word, the wicked, but other terms are the enemies, the nations. In Psalm 10, David focuses particularly on the wicked man, who is representative of all those who stand against the Messianic king and his people. David refers to three statements that capture the essence of what this wicked man thinks. One of them, Psalm 10:6, he says to himself, "Nothing will ever shake me." He swears, "No one will ever do me harm." Psalm 10:10, he says to himself, "God will never notice." He covers his face and never sees. Psalm 10:13, why does he say to himself, "He won't call me to account"? Psalm 14:1 says that the fool says in his heart. Psalm 10:6, he says to himself. Psalm 10:10, he says to himself. Psalm 10:13, why does he say to himself? Do you notice the similarities? The fool referred to here in Psalm 14 is the one who is representative of all those who do not accept the Lord's rule, who stand against the king, who have rejected his law. This is a practical atheism. It's not so much that this person says philosophically or scientifically that there is no God and therefore he is a fool. It's that this is his character. He has rejected God's rule. He is accountable to nobody by himself. And so from that, his deeds are corrupt and evil and vile. We see that Paul quotes a portion of this passage, the second stanza, in Romans 10:10 through 12. In that argument, Paul is developing the teaching that God is or has declared his salvation to the entire world, and that all people, Jews and Gentiles alike, that is, all the world, is accountable and is sinful before him and needs to turn to him for salvation. So we need to understand this psalm, like we do all the psalms, through the eyes of the New Testament writers. And Paul gives us an example. In referring to the fool, David is referring to in perhaps, again, a metaphorical way, although I'm sure David didn't have the idea of metaphor in his mind. Nevertheless, the fool is all of those who, prior to coming to Christ, have rebelled against God and do not receive his rule. Is there any hope for such a situation? Well, yeah, once again, we look at the end of this psalm, and as is often the case, at the end of the psalm, David expresses his hope of salvation. Oh, that salvation for Israel would come out of Zion. When the Lord restores his people, let Jacob rejoice and Israel be glad. Compared to Psalm 2, we can see how David is referring to this king that God declares he has in fact installed on his holy mountain. In Luke 1:69 through 75, after the birth of John the Baptist, who proclaimed the coming king, we see that Zechariah declares, "He, that is God, has raised up a horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David, as he said, that is, God said through his holy prophets long ago, salvation from our enemies and from the land or hand of all who hate us, to show mercy to his holy covenant, the oath he swore to our fathers, to rescue us from the hand of our enemies." That last line is so indicative of one of the major themes that has been developed from Psalms 1 all the way to this point in Psalm 14.